He invited his ex-wife to his wedding just to mock her. But when she walked in with the billionaire, the entire hall froze in disbelief. Hello, family. Welcome back to another emotional story. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's dive in. Ethan Miles had everything a man could dream of. At least, that's what he told himself every morning as he sipped expensive coffee on the balcony of his penthouse. He had the cars, the money, the designer suits, and now he was about to marry Vanessa Hart, daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country. But on a cloudy Thursday morning, as the cold wind rattled against the tall glass windows of his luxury apartment, Ethan wasn't thinking about love or family. He wasn't planning the honeymoon. Instead, he sat at his glossy dining table, holding a golden-trimmed invitation card. For him, it wasn't just paper. It was a weapon. He dipped his pen and carefully wrote the words, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Ethan Miles and Vanessa Hart." And on the envelope, he wrote a name that made him smirk. Grace Carter, his ex-wife. 2 years ago, Grace had been everything to him. She had no wealth, no luxury, but she had love. Back then, Ethan lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a broken heater. His business dreams were failing, his debts rising, and yet Grace stayed by his side. She cooked simple meals, encouraged him when he wanted to give up, and kept saying, "One day, things will be better." But for Ethan, better never came fast enough. The night he met Vanessa Hart at a business event changed everything. Vanessa was glamorous, powerful, and came from a family that could open doors Ethan had only dreamed of. Within weeks, he had left Grace behind, trading loyalty for wealth. The divorce was quick. Too quick. Ethan made sure Grace left with nothing but her old car and her clothes. Now, with his wedding just days away, he wanted one last thing. To see the look on Grace's face when she realized what she had lost. To watch her walk into the ballroom, small and out of place, surrounded by wealth she could never touch. Ethan leaned back in his chair, sealing the envelope with a satisfied grin. "Send this today," he told his assistant. "Some people need to see what real success looks like." Across town, Grace was stepping out of the diner after another exhausting shift. Her hair was tied up messily. Her uniform smelled faintly of coffee and grease, and she counted her tips with weary fingers, already calculating which bills could wait until next week. Life had been cruel since Ethan left, but she had survived. When she reached her small apartment above the laundromat, she noticed a thick, gold-edged envelope in her mailbox. Curious, she opened it. Her breath caught. Ethan Miles and Vanessa Hart. Her hands trembled as memories came rushing back. Ethan walking out, leaving her in tears. The night she cried alone. The morning she forced herself to keep going. And now, he had invited her to watch him marry into wealth. To humiliate her further, her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, peeked in through the open door. "What's that, honey?" Grace handed her the card silently. The old woman's eyes widened. "Oh no, after everything he did, he still has the nerve to invite you? That's cruel. You don't need to go." Grace stared at the card for a long moment. Every part of her wanted to rip it into pieces. But then, slowly, a small smile touched her lips. "Oh, I'll go," she whispered. Mrs. Peterson looked shocked. "Why would you?" Grace's eyes hardened. "Because he thinks I'm still the woman he left behind." It's time he saw the truth. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the hum of the laundromat machines, Grace imagined the grand wedding. Chandeliers, champagne, a room full of rich strangers. She saw Ethan smiling proudly, Vanessa glowing in her gown and herself. Plain, unnoticed. For a moment, doubt crept in, but then her phone buzzed. A message from Mia, her co-worker. "Hey, remember my cousin Adrian? He's back in town. He's organizing his charity gala and looking for someone to help. Pays well. Want me to connect you?" Grace's heart skipped a beat. Adrian Steele, the billionaire. She remembered meeting him once briefly. Tall, confident, the kind of man who carried himself with quiet power. Her fingers hovered over her phone, then typed, "Yes. Tell him I'm interested." She tucked the invitation card into her drawer. She didn't need to look at it again, because this time, she wasn't going to Ethan's wedding as a poor ex-wife he expected to pity. She was going to arrive as someone who would leave the entire room stunned. The days passed quickly, and soon the city buzzed with whispers about the wedding of Ethan Miles and Vanessa Hart. Their union wasn't just about love. It was about power. Newspapers called it the merger of hearts and empires. Businessmen polished their shoes, politicians marked their calendars, and high society women debated over which designer gown Vanessa would wear. But Ethan's excitement wasn't just about marrying into the Hart family. His true anticipation was for one particular guest, Grace. Meanwhile, Grace had stepped into a world she never imagined. When Mia connected her with Adrian Steele, she thought it would be a simple part-time job, maybe setting up tables at a charity gala or helping with paperwork. But Adrian was different. From the moment she entered his office, sleek, modern, with tall windows overlooking the skyline, Adrian's sharp blue eyes studied her with interest. "You're Grace Cartwright," he said in a deep voice that carried both authority and warmth. Grace nodded nervously. "Yes, I came about the assistant role for the gala." Adrian leaned back in his leather chair, a faint smile on his lips. "Tell me, Grace, have you ever run events before?" Her heart raced. "Not exactly, but I've worked under pressure. I know how to handle people, and I don't quit." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Adrian chuckled. "Good answer." That was the beginning. Within days, Grace found herself working closely with Adrian. She organized meetings, answered calls, and coordinated with charity partners. What surprised her most wasn't just the work, but the way Adrian treated her. With respect, with trust. One evening, after a long day, Adrian found her still at the office, sorting through piles of paperwork. "You should go home," he said. Grace looked up, embarrassed. "I just wanted to finish this before tomorrow." Adrian walked closer, his gaze softening. "You know, most people here only do the bare minimum. But you give more." "Why?" Her throat tightened. For a moment, she wanted to tell him everything. About Ethan, about the humiliation, about the wedding invitation sitting in her drawer. But instead, she simply said, "Because I don't want to be the person people look down on anymore." Adrian's eyes lingered on her, and then he gave a slow nod. "I understand more than you think." As the wedding day approached, Grace's confidence grew. She bought a simple but elegant dress with her first paycheck, something that made her feel like herself again. Her smile began to return. But 2 nights before the wedding, Adrian noticed her sitting quietly at the gala rehearsal, staring at nothing. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. Grace hesitated, then pulled the invitation card from her purse. "This, my ex-husband. He invited me to his wedding, not out of kindness, out of cruelty." Adrian took the card, reading it carefully. His jaw tightened. "So, he wanted to humiliate you?" Grace nodded. "He expects me to walk in there alone. Small, invisible." For a long moment, Adrian didn't speak. Then he turned to her, his expression firm. "Then prove him wrong. Don't go as a victim. Go as someone who's stronger than before." Grace blinked. "You think I should go?" "I think," Adrian said slowly, "you shouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing you broken. And if you'd like, you won't have to go alone." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" Adrian smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hinted at power. "Grace, I don't attend weddings. But for this, I'll make an exception." And so, on the morning of the wedding, while Ethan admired his reflection in a mirror, adjusting his expensive cufflinks, convinced that the day would be his ultimate victory, Grace stepped out of her apartment building, her hand resting gently on Adrian Steele's arm. The Billionaire's black limousine waited at the curb, polished to perfection. Cameras already swarmed the area, flashing wildly as the two of them approached. Grace lifted her chin. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel weak. She felt unstoppable. And Ethan had no idea what was about to hit him. The Hart family mansion had been transformed into a palace that evening. Golden chandeliers glittered above, violins played softly, and waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits whispered excitedly about the grand event. Ethan Miles stood tall near the altar, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's yearly salaries. He flashed his confident smile, shaking hands with influential businessmen, greeting politicians and exchanging nods with celebrities. But his eyes kept drifting toward the door. Any moment now, Grace would walk in. He imagined her in some outdated dress, clutching her purse nervously, looking like she didn't belong. The thought made him smirk. "Looking sharp, son," Mr. Hart said proudly, patting Ethan on the back. "Tonight, you're officially part of this family. Make sure you carry the Hart legacy with pride." "I will, sir," Ethan replied smoothly. But inside, he wasn't thinking about legacy. He was thinking about revenge. At that very moment, the mansion's massive double doors opened. A hush fell across the hall as heads turned. Grace stepped in, but she was not the Grace everyone expected. She wore a flowing midnight blue gown that shimmered under the chandelier light. Her hair elegantly styled, her posture straight and confident. She looked radiant. But what truly stole the breath of the crowd was the man walking beside her. Adrian Steele, the billionaire, the name every guest in that room knew. His presence alone shifted the air, his tailored black suit sharp, his expression calm yet commanding. Photographers and guests gasped as whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that Adrian Steele? What's he doing here? And who's the woman with him?" Grace's hand rested gently on Adrian's arm, and together they moved gracefully into the room, as if they belonged there more than anyone else. Ethan's smile froze. His chest tightened. This was what he had planned. Vanessa, standing nearby in her wedding gown, leaned toward him, her voice sharp but hushed. "Ethan, why is Adrian Steele here? And who is that woman?" Ethan swallowed hard, forcing a strained smile. That's nobody. Just my ex-wife. Grace." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Your ex-wife? With Adrian Steele?" The murmurs grew louder. People pulled out their phones, some even snapping discreet pictures. Social media was already buzzing, hashtags forming before the ceremony had even begun. Grace, on the other hand, kept her head high, every step deliberate. She could feel Ethan's eyes burning into her, but she didn't flinch. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times. The humiliation he wanted turned into his downfall. As she and Adrian reached the front rows, Adrian guided her into her seat with the kind of care that didn't just look polite. It looked protective, powerful. Leaning slightly toward her, Adrian whispered, "You're handling this well." Grace's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Better than I thought I would." From across the room, Ethan's anger boiled beneath his polished exterior. He had wanted Grace to look broken, weak, defeated. Instead, she sat there glowing, with the most powerful man in the city at her side. The wedding ceremony began, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere. Every vow he spoke to Vanessa felt hollow as his gaze kept drifting to Grace. The way the guests looked at her, the whispers that never stopped. It was as if the spotlight had shifted. When the officiant finally declared Ethan and Vanessa husband and wife, applause filled the hall. But mixed within that applause were murmurs, stares, and speculation. Everyone wasn't talking about the newlyweds. They were talking about Grace Carter and Adrian Steele. As the reception began, Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He excused himself from Vanessa's side and marched across the hall. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he stopped in front of Grace. "Well," he said through clenched teeth, trying to keep his voice low but firm, "you certainly made an entrance." Grace looked up slowly, her expression calm, almost amused. "Did I? Funny. I thought this night was supposed to be about you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Don't play games, Grace. You brought him here on purpose." Before Grace could respond, Adrian leaned slightly forward, his tone calm but cutting. "She didn't bring me anywhere. I invited her. If you have a problem with that, it's with me." The word struck Ethan like ice. Guests nearby pretended to mingle, but their ears were tuned to every word. Grace tilted her head, her voice steady. You wanted me here, Ethan. Congratulations. I came, but I didn't come to be humiliated. Not anymore. Ethan's eyes darkened. For the first time that evening, he felt the weight of losing something more valuable than wealth, more powerful than connections. He had lost control. The reception grew louder, music swelling, glasses clinking, but in the center of it all stood Ethan, Grace, and Adrian. Guests pretended to laugh, to dance, but their eyes kept darting toward the standoff. They could sense it, the tension sharp enough to cut the air. Ethan leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper. Do you think this changes anything, Grace? You'll always be the woman I left behind. You'll never be more than that. Grace stared at him for a long moment, and then she smiled. A calm, genuine smile that made Ethan falter. You're right about one thing, she said softly. I am the woman you left behind. And for a long time, I thought that defined me. But not anymore. Her voice grew stronger, carrying across the polished marble floor. You see, Ethan, I didn't come here to prove myself to you. I came here to prove something to me, that I don't need your approval, your name, or your pity to matter. I already matter. The guests nearby fell silent. Even Vanessa, still across the hall, froze mid-conversation, her eyes fixed on them. Ethan opened his mouth to retort, but Adrian spoke before he could. His voice was calm, yet heavy with authority. Grace has more strength than anyone in this room, Ethan, and you try to destroy it. That's what weak men do. They break what they can't control. Ethan's face burned red. He wanted to argue, but the truth of Adrian's words weighed on him. He glanced around and saw the guests. They weren't laughing with him anymore. They were looking at him with disdain, with judgment. The power he thought he owned was slipping. Grace stood, smoothing her gown. For a brief second, she looked into Ethan's eyes, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with release. I forgive you, she said quietly. Ethan blinked, stunned. Not because you deserve it, Grace continued, but because I deserve peace. She turned, slipping her arm through Adrian's, and together they walked away, not hurried, not ashamed, but proud. The doors of the mansion opened once again. Cool night air brushed against her skin as Grace stepped outside, cameras still flashing. But this time, she didn't shrink from the lights. She lifted her chin, knowing the world was seeing her not as the ex-wife Ethan tried to shame, but as a woman who had risen from her own ashes. Adrian looked at her, admiration clear in his eyes. You did well tonight. Grace smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. No, I finally did right by myself. Inside the mansion, Ethan stood frozen, Vanessa's furious whispers echoing his ears, the whispers of guests spreading faster than the music. His perfect night had turned into his greatest humiliation. And Grace? She had walked away with dignity, strength, and something Ethan could never touch again, her freedom. Moral/closure. Life will always put people in your path who try to break you, mock you, or define you by your lowest moments. But true power lies not in revenge. It lies in rising above, in knowing your worth, and in walking away with grace. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not in winning against them, but in winning yourself back.